Welcome to Join the Conversation. I'm your host, Executive and Behavioral Health Coach Kurinn Wright, and it is Problem Gambling Awareness Month this March. We have a very special guest to help us unpack some important topics. We will discuss the digital influence, conditioning, gambling behavior, and generational impact. To help us unpack the topic of problem gambling, I would love to introduce a special guest today, founder and CEO of Kindbridge Behavioral Health, Daniel Umfleet. Welcome to the conversation, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Kurinn. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I would love for you to share a little bit about you and your background with our listeners.
Sure, no problem. I started Kindbridge Behavioral Health back in 2020. It was a slow beginning to get everything going and up and running, but our objective was to build a center of excellence in a virtual digital treatment environment for gamblers who are in distress. And it's accelerated rather quickly into one of the largest growing companies in the US that works directly with gamblers who need assistance with mental health issues. I come from a consulting background. I spent a large portion of my career doing hospital turnarounds and health system implementations. And ultimately, this was a very easy bridge to walk across to start setting up systems for care.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited about the future for what it is we're doing and what we're working on.
I'm excited too. A lot of people don't see gambling as a problem, but we both know March being Problem Gambling Awareness Month is proof enough that there is a big problem with gambling. And one of the questions that is often asked is, are games designed to keep people hooked? Is this something with the algorithms? How much of what we label self-control issues is really the human response system to systems that are built to keep us engaged?
You're asking a bigger system level question, right? So I think when it comes to game design, we have to look across pretty much everything that exists in the digital ecosystem and everything that we interact with on the technology that we are so accustomed to interacting with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
The brain is very easy to train for fast reward cycles. Examples of everyday loops that folks get stuck in is, social media likes, notifications, and the gratification coming from notifications and updates, short form videos and reels and shorts and all these things.
Absolutely.
In-game achievements when you're playing some sort of video game or when you're on a financial investment app where you see the fireworks explode when something happens, and online shopping confirmations, sort of all of it, like each loop follows the same pattern of action, anticipation, reward, repeat. So a lot of the way that the technology is designed is to really hack into those loops and keep that sort of reward architecture front and center to keep people engaged with what it is that they're doing on the phone.
Hearing you say that right now, it just brings up so many. I mean, you gave some really great examples of how all of us are vulnerable to potential gambling addiction based on how we get drawn into these different types of loops. And some of them seem so harmless at first until you need that same level of dopamine. And maybe you don't have access to this anymore, but then you start exploring other options and fall into one of those other categories that you named. I think that the cycles that are created for individuals are something that needs to be a part of the education side of gambling as well, because if you're not aware of the cycles and you stumble into several of them, it's going to be too late by the time you realize you have an addiction. The transfer effect. You mentioned these are the systems set up, and they are. Let's talk about that transfer from I'm currently in this digital game or digital paradox, and then now I'm being quietly conditioned for higher risk reward behaviors. I am not necessarily seeking that, but there is a parallel between the two.
Yeah, well, think a couple of topics kind of come to mind when you kind of start down that angle for all of
Mhm.
this, right? And I think a big thing is like risk perception is totally
Mm,
collapsed. I think so much of what has sort of gone on over really the last, I got to do quick math. Let's call it 60 years, 60 plus, is sort of this cultural reframing of something that is traditionally or historically has sort of been viewed as a, sort of risky and exceptional behavior. It's a lot of reframing towards a hope mechanism,
mm,
right? Um,
yeah.
a lot of that really started to come into play in the 60s when lottery at the state level started to be introduced, right? And a lot of what we saw was implementation of other financial instruments, and then right on a parallel path was implementation of things like the lottery.
Mhm.
And lottery was perceived as this sort of hope mechanism of like, hey, I can spend whatever a lottery ticket cost in the 60s and potentially walk away with $100,000, $200,000, which,
Right.
obviously was a lot more money at that time than it is today. And so, like, as we've kind of gone through this massive sort of cultural reframing, risk perception around a lot of activities, not just gambling, has totally collapsed. But gambling still carries the same structural characteristics that it historically did. Negative expected value, rapid enforcement loops,
Mhm.
variable reward structures, loss chasing dynamics, these types of things. And the cultural framing has changed, not the underlying mathematics of psychology. So what tends to happen when we start really unpacking these things, right?
Yeah.
And people approach gambling with the same mindset they use for fantasy sports, video games, and
Mm.
social media apps, right? Rather than something closer to financial speculation or high risk consumption. So historically over time, like our perception of what is risky and what is not has become totally different.
Yeah.
And this sort of new wave of thinking is becoming totally normalized. And I would argue it really is normalized inside of the culture already. And it's been there for a long time.
It has, and when you talk about that, let's look at normalization today because there are a lot of sports games, there are a lot of celebrities who promote sports betting, and there are a lot of youth who play games on their phones that translate into gambling apps. It's socially acceptable. Gambling is a form of, hey, let's hang out, let's connect, let's do this. And now I'm even seeing people who trade stocks suffer with some of the same behavioral patterns, and it gets out of control in a similar way that gambling can get out of control for people who end up with gambling addiction. So you're right, at some point we've normalized this as a casual entertainment, and behind that is the high risk behavior that we're also normalizing.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.